We have Fred Minifie to talk about the history of the University District, and I'm very interested in that because that's kind of like my childhood home. It's actually my grandfather's. Well, he grew up in Wallingford, but this is even before his time. He graduated from Lincoln in 1923 and then went to the University of Washington. But we'll hear some of the really early years. I'm looking forward to this, and I'm sure you are too. So go ahead, Fred.
All right, very good. Well, thank you all for coming. I want to do several things today. One of the first things I want to do is to have you get your minds around what it would be like to live in a forest that was filled with huge trees, so huge that you can hardly believe they existed. And you know where that was? Right here. In 1800, there was a huge forest north of Lake Union, and as a result, it was primarily lived in by groups of Indians. But to get your mind around what it would be like, I want you to think about those big trees. And I thought I'd do that by having one of our residents help me.
Wow.
Now that's a pretty good sized tree. And this one's a big Doug fir that is also a huge tree. These were over at Lake Quinault a few years ago. And happily, there are some huge trees over there that can still be appreciated. But the university district didn't exist in 1861. The land belonged to the Indians, so the government in the 1800s, the early pioneers of Washington Territory, had to devise some kind of a plan to extinguish the Indian tribe's rightful claims to the land, and to transfer that to the U.S. government. So the U.S. government could then transfer the land to other owners. Indeed, in a maneuver, the morality and fairness of which is still debated. Governor Stevens of Washington Territory signed a treaty in 1855 with the Duwamish Indians, which transferred the title to a vast area of land, including what is now the University District. That went to the U.S. government. The government then proceeded to sell the land to investors and to grant homesteads for settlers. Now this is a graph showing where Lake Union is and Portage Bay, but notice that the first homestead was given in 1873 to a person named Christian Brownfield. He lived there for a time with his wife, later got divorced and left, but he was the first resident of the area north of Lake Union. The other parcels were sold to people who were interested in developing the area. And so they were holding on to the land until such time as they could be able to develop it or sell it to other people and so on. So that was the beginning. Now, at that time, in 1903, Professor Edmund Meany, he had an interview with the last of the Union Bay Indians who lived on the south shore of Portage Bay. Two of the Indians, John and Madeline, lived in a crude little cabin near the shore. Old John told Professor Meany that when he was a boy, many Indians lived on the shores of both Lake Union and Lake Washington. And with, this is a picture of where the University of Washington Territory was established. This picture is a picture of downtown Seattle. This picture is about 1861. As you could appreciate, it was a kind of a rough little town. This is up on the hill quite a ways. If we look at the building that was built for the University of Washington Territory, it's right up here. It was located on land that currently is where the Fairmont Olympic Hotel stands. It doesn't look like what downtown Seattle looks like today, but happily the university has retained that land, so they're making a nice profit off of renting the land to other people. Seattle had a population of about 250 people in 1861. And the census identified in 1860 identified that in King County, 302 people lived in the county. So the Territorial University of Washington began because someone thought that the territory needed a university. The university didn't get off to a very good start. Well, before we talk about the start, I want to ask Jerry Carvey to comment on something. Maybe you can pass the...
All right.
Jerry, I need to have a current evaluation of what the rating of the University of Washington would be if we looked at it nationally or internationally.
It was a bit of a surprise to me to find out that the University of Washington is ranked 7th in the world.
Wow.
It was ranked ahead of Yale and Princeton, and right behind Oxford.
Amazing.
Quite remarkable.
Put that in your mind, and now then let's look at how it was when it started. First of all, this comment was made by individuals who were involved with the educational program within the territory. We think the expense already is too great for the public good of the territory. In fact, if the matter is considered, we shall find that we are not yet prepared for a territorial university. We have reason to believe that there is not a young man in the territory who could pass an examination to enter the university course. Hence, where is the propriety of spending all of this money? There is not in all of King County 100 children of lawful age to attend even a district school. Our common schools demand our attention first. Then our high schools, academics, or academies, colleges and universities. But in the above matters, it's reversed. University first, then come common schools. We feel that it is our duty to protect against the hasty expenditure of our public school funds. We hold that the public good should never be sacrificed for individual interest. In 1873, Governor Elisha P. Ferry said, "It can hardly be said that we have a university, except in name." Okay. Here's a faculty at the university in 1882 and 83. In 1875, the Register of the Territory at the University University of Washington, the first published university catalog lists courses of study. Tuition was $12 per term for the collegiate or scientific departments. The university catalog that year also stated that the course of instruction is in accordance with the aim and design of the university to bring it as speedily as possible to a condition which shall enable the youth of the territory of both sexes to obtain a thorough education which shall prepare them for the duties of life. Now here's a picture of a group of students out. You can see the pillars that were in the old building, and they're huddled around there in 1888 or 89. We couldn't tell when that picture was taken. Washington became the 42nd state of the United States of America on November 11th, 1889. Excuse me. This was after a hiatus of 13 years when no new states were admitted to the Union. The United States Congress passed an act enabling the territories of Washington, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Montana to seek statehood. So that was in 1889. Now something else happened in 1889, and that was the big fire in downtown Seattle. The fire took out a number of buildings up through about 4th Avenue. But since the University Washington Territory was just a bit east of that, it didn't get badly damaged at that point. So it stayed there. Now I want to introduce to you Professor Edmund Minifie. He came to Seattle as a young man. He was 15 years old in 1877, and he became a graduate of the class of 1885. When he became so deeply attached to the university, he wanted to do something to help the university. So what he did was he wanted to run for the state legislature on a platform in which he pledged to work for the removal of the school to Interlaken in the northern part of the city. Interlaken, that's the isthmus between Lake Union and Lake Washington. And that, in the Montlake area, it was just solid land in there. And also, he would do all he could to have the state properly represented at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. That was his platform for running to office in the new state government, since we'd just become a state. So he then took his plan to the Chamber of Commerce, who endorsed his plan. But there were 3 tracts of school lands that were available. Okay, the 3 tracts of school lands were the Fort Lawton District, Jefferson Park, and the present campus, all suitable for a university site. So it recommended that the legislature make its own choice. Well, Minifie was elected to the House of Representatives, and early in 1891 session, he was appointed as the chairman of a joint committee to consider the matter. And he recommended that the group visit Seattle, as he felt that once they saw the advantages of a campus bordering on 2 lakes, their decision could be made readily. As those were the days when free railroad passes were available to legislators, he had no trouble in arranging for the trip. Committee members chartered a small boat at the south end of Lake Union and were taken along the east shore to the present campus. Apparently, David Denny's streetcar and the Latona Bridge were not yet in operation. They disembarked, and Minnie guided them through the timber. Before the expedition was over, he mounted a stump on the present campus and eloquently pleaded the cause that a great university, a great institution, which he felt would one day grace this site. Back in Olympia, the legislature soon introduced a bill to establish, locate, and support the present university. Most of the provisions were passed without objection, except as to the size of the tract. It was felt that to enlarge the campus from 10 acres to nearly 400 acres was too great a jump. So the bill was passed, but there was no appropriation made, so that it turned out that this wasn't going to go very well. Oops. They had. Well, in any event, let me just say this, that Minnie realized that that was far too small, and the next year he decided to run for the legislature again. He did so, and they appointed him to be in charge of the committee that was going to select the location of the site. And as it turned out, they of course selected the one at the present campus site. And he also helped with the transition from that point. Now, before we go ahead to talk about what happened over on the campus, I want you to look at a couple of other things that had a major influence. First, if you look at this upper picture, that's an old wagon road that went across the campus area that the university moved to. It was just filled with trees and brush. And that was like all of the land over here. It had the huge trees, more so than the ones you see in this picture, but it was all filled with timber. And then if you look at the lower picture, this is a picture that was taken from the lower Ravenna area. Yep. The lower picture then shows the Ravenna area about where 25th. Show you one thing here. If you look right back here, this is looking at the lower Ravenna area, northeast to about where 52nd Street would be, looking across this way. But right back here is the first college that appeared in the university district. And it was the Seattle Female College. Wow. At a distance. And they had produced this college as a way of providing a place for women to be able to go to school. And this existed in the university district well in advance of when the university actually got started there.
Presumably they were going to be teachers in the elementary schools?
Yeah, yes, that was part of it, and the other part was to teach them about ethics, essentially. It was a school for girls to bring them into becoming ladies.
Before the 19th Amendment.
Okay. This area is just rapidly developing as time goes on. If you looked from 1860 up through 2000, or 1860 to 1910, there was huge growth taking place. Even in downtown Seattle, after the fire, when the Alaskan gold rush began, many of the business people in downtown Seattle did very well selling things to those going up to Alaska and providing them places to stay when they were in town and so on. So it was a time that businesses were growing rapidly. There were many more people moving into this area. And one of the things that helped that happen was the railroads. The Northern Pacific Railroad had originally made the purchase of a lot of land in the area of Tacoma. And they were determined to make Tacoma the primary city in what was then the territory. But as time went on, the railroads were just crucial to being able to bring in the materials that needed to be used to develop the university district itself. And that worked out very nicely. The Northern Pacific, however, provided most of its support to Tacoma. And they had intermittent service to Seattle. And indeed, at one time, cut off the support entirely. So that the railroad was then still used, but various Seattle leaders realized that the continued development of the area needed a railroad. They developed a plan that resulted in the Seattle Lakeshore and Eastern Railroad to hook up with the Canadian Pacific. This system is now where the Burke-Gilman Trail is, for those of you who know the Burke-Gilman Trail. But it led north out of Seattle, leading from Seattle to Snohomish. And the rail system helped the developers get their materials to develop the university district. Now, I want you to take a look at this map. This map is McKee's correct road map for Seattle and vicinity in 1894. If you looked here, you can see where the, or I guess it comes in here. This is where the railroad went. And if you look at the black dots, that's where people are living. And if you look in this area, there's hardly anyone living here, a few next door. We live in Latona, and here is Fremont. Ravenna is up here. And you have a good idea of what the layout of this area is like. Sandpoint. If you come down here, Yesler is essentially Laurelhurst. But I want you to look at the shore of Lake Washington. It goes here, around here, way up in Ravenna, and then back down here. Lake Union is over here. So that this area in between is simply the Montlake area, but it has no waterway going across it. So I think if you look at that, you can appreciate the problem that is going to be developing here. I will spend some time in the next presentation talking about the development of the Lake Washington Ship Canal and the impact that it had. But there are a couple of things about that that are very interesting. Okay, now let's get back to the university itself. Due to all of the good efforts of Edmund Minifie and the fact that they had selected an architect to develop the first building, that was Denny Hall. This was underway in 1894. That's when the Denny Hall was being built. Now, even before it was built, they decided to have a major event to put in the cornerstone of the building. And down on the lower slide, this shows the building that was going on and how they wanted to be able to celebrate its event. I should mention that in 1894 it proved out to be an auspicious time to build, for the panic of the preceding year had the effect of cutting the cost of the first building to $125,000, so that enough money was left over to erect a gymnasium, which stood for many years near the northern boundary of the campus. Sufficient stone also remained with which they could build the observatory that was still standing near Denny Hall. There's been so much controversy over the selection of the new campus that when the date was chosen to lay the cornerstone, it was planned to make it an occasion of real significance. The Masonic Lodge was put in charge of the ceremonies. 2 special trains of the Lakeshore and Eastern Railroad, that is now back to the Northern Pacific, went out from Columbia Street Depot, one carrying the Knights of Templar, resplendent in their uniforms. The 3rd Avenue streetcars were crowded to capacity, and many spectators went in their own wagons. It was estimated that 1,000 persons were in attendance. 300 Masons and Knights Templar marched with the faculty, alumni, and pioneers to the temporary stands near the present northeast corner of Denny Hall, where a large American flag served as the canopy. Music was furnished by the 1st Regiment Band. After a prayer by Reverend Daniel Bagley, Masonic Grand Master J.M. Taylor prepared to lay and seal the cornerstone. Many old items found their way into the box it contains. Everybody present seemed intent on putting something in that cornerstone. 300 Masons and Knights Templar marched with faculty's on. Music was furnished by the 1st Regiment Band. Henry Schmitz, President Emeritus of the University of Washington, wrote, "The establishment of the university in the territory of Washington in 1861 was more than a significant event. It was an act of faith, of hope, of vision. Seattle boasted a population of 302, including Indians. While the moving of the university from downtown Seattle to its present location was not of the same magnitude as starting it in the first place, There was a substantial amount of courage and confidence displayed in locating it in 1895 in a community which had about the same number of inhabitants as Seattle had when the university was first established. That is, north of the Lake Union, there were about 250 people living. So it was a small area, but it was courageous to actually put the university in that location. Okay. I think this is an interesting look at how much activity was going on from the period of 1887 to 1909. They had platted all of these areas around the university so that they could be sold or used for businesses, whatever. But as you can see, there was a lot of activity going on in this short period of 20 years. And during that time, there were a lot of people that were coming in to live in the areas adjacent to the university district. Some of the elegant homes that went in the 1900s were later torn down as the university business district area developed. The upper picture here shows the house of the Goodnoes, later owned by T.F. Murphy, until it was later moved to build the Egyptian Theater. And subsequently, the theater was remodeled and became the Pay and Save drugstore. The lower picture shows the house of Dr. Samuel Freed in 1906 on the southeast corner of Northeast 46th Street, 5th Street and Brooklyn Avenue North. You know that the University District was originally going to be called Brooklyn, and hence the name of Brooklyn Avenue. And it had interest until the university developed the area, and it suddenly became the University District and has remained so ever since. The house that Samuel Freed had, it was later the site of the Neptune Theater. So what was going on at that time were just very rapid changes. I wanted you to take a look at this picture. The top picture shows the University District in 1903. Notice that the trees and the limited number of homes and businesses are in that view. This would have been taken from across Lake Union, looking at the University District. Down below, there's a picture of the Latona Bridge that was built in 1891 so that streetcars could come into the district. It reached the north shore of, at 6th Avenue Northeast and was used until the University Bridge was built in 1919. It was across this bridge that you see in the lower picture that many of the people came on the cable cars to visit during the building of the first building on campus and the celebration of the cornerstone of Denny Hall. Now here are a couple of pictures that would give us some idea as to what the nature of this area was like. The upper picture in this one shows the driver Herb Porter in a delivery wagon for Murphy's Meat Market on University Way Northeast and 43rd Street, looking north in about 1895. The lower picture shows a streetcar at University Way Northeast and 52nd Street in 1897. 3 cars ran on that part of the line until about 7 p.m. Later, streetcars stopped at 38th Avenue Northeast and Brooklyn Avenue Northeast. The streetcars provided access needed to develop the area. So already in 1897, they have streetcars available to get into the University District, bring people there and take them back. This became important as students began coming out to the university. What you see here in the top picture is a picture of a stop for the streetcar. And this was on the corner of Northeast 42nd Street and University Way. That's about where the building was that I worked in. We were 42nd and 15th, right next to this area. And this was an important stop because many students needed the protection from the rain because they had long waiting periods between the times that these streetcars would get out there. And so this was at the entrance to the university. It was moved to University Way about 1905 as Northeast 42nd was being graded and paved. Now if you look at the lower picture, and you look carefully, you will see that logs are being hauled down 15th Avenue when the area north of the university was being logged. And this was still going on. The whole process of being able to cut the trees in this huge forest out there and bring them down to where they could be handled in the mills was very important for the business of the area. And so many times they did this by just the use of a horse and pulling the log and taking it on down that way. I thought you might like to see this one. This is the columns. These were the columns that existed on the original Territory University, Washington, and each of the columns has a special name. These were removed when the building was moved to make room for the new buildings on its original site, hence the new buildings in downtown. When they were erected on Campus Day, April 28th, on the path leading to Denny Hall, the columns were named Loyalty, Industry, Faith, and Efficiency. Life. On February 18th, 1921, they were moved to the present site of the Sylvan Theater. By 1958, the capitals of the columns were decayed and were replaced with fiberglass duplicates. And it sounds like out here, doesn't it? The columns were all that remains of the original university first building. Ravenna Park is just north of the University District. And I'm including the picture here at the top because it was described as one of the most pristine and beautiful parks in the entire U.S. Now, development and careless usage of the park severely damaged the park over the years. 120 years ago, it still had its natural beauty. But if you were to go there today, it's a very misused park, and its natural beauty has gone, which is really too bad as a result of the development. Now the lower picture shows the University District in 1906 as viewed from Capitol Hill. You can see that some of the trees have been taken down, but there's still a good number of them up here, and they have more houses down near houses and businesses down near the water. But the actual development in the university area has been pretty limited at this point. Here is the first footbridge over Cowan Park at 15th Avenue Northeast. That was built in 1907. And the lower picture is the second bridge over Cowan Park. Since they only had one level when it was first built, the users walked down steps on one end and up steps at the other. That bridge was succeeded by a streetcar and a pedestrian trestle in 1925, and then by its present bridge in 1937. So change was taking place regularly. Here's a picture that shows the university district as it existed in 1906. Again, it was taken from Capitol Hill and shows the vicinity of this. This would be the area right in here where the University Bridge would eventually be built. And you see more homes and businesses down here closer to the water. That's something that we saw on the other slide as well. Well, essentially, that's the end of the early years of development in the University District. And the next presentations that I will have will talk about major influences that happened on the ever-changing University District. Let me make a comment about one of the slides had a description of the people who originally donated the money to create the territorial university. And there were some of the major families here in Seattle that donated, I think about 8 acres from one of them. There were a couple of acres from another family, and others donated money to do this. So that was critical to be able to have that land, and that land today is still producing real support for the university. The other thing that I wanted to mention was that the railroads were very important, but at one time I wasn't able to give you the times that the university had to shut down. When we first started the university, I think I could go back up, and I could just take a moment. I think I can get back to, oh, here we are. The donation of 8 acres of land by Arthur and May Denny. The additional 2 acres were deeded by Charles and Mary Terry and Edward Linder. A.S. Mercer was the first professor and teacher. He received his reputation later as being the person who caused the Mercer girls to come from Boston to Washington Territory when there was a shortage of unmarried women. The students in the Seattle area, there were very few students, and it was 15 years before the university graduated its first collegiate degree. In June 1876, Clara A. McCarty received a Bachelor of Science diploma. The first graduate was a woman. I think that's interesting. Between 1861 and 1898, only 71 bachelor's degrees and 217 teachers' diplomas were conferred. So for many years, the territorial university was plagued with financial and administrative problems. It closed in 1863. Started in 1861, closed in 1863. Again in 67 to 69, and again in 1874. And in 1876, the last on account of poverty. From 1882 to 84, the legislature failed to grant the university funds. And Henry Villard, president of the Northern Pacific Railroad, contributed $4,000 during this period and saved the university from closing yet again. In 1861 to 1895, there were 10 presidents, with Thomas Gatch serving as the longest, from 1887 to 1895. So I think reviewing that, you see how rough the start of the University of Washington was. And yet today it has been able to turn around and grow into this magnificent university. And what we want to do is to be able to take a look at what happened as a result of the move to the university district, and then go from there. I might tell you that there is a booklet that has been put together by the University Lions Club that talks about the university district. And many of these pictures were available because the person that wrote this was a banker who worked at a bank that had a lot of pictures, all in black and white, of the university district. And that has been made available. But for those of you who would like to have a very careful study of what went on, this is a good one to look at, and I'd be happy to loan it to anybody. Any comments or questions at this point? Henry?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Do you want to be the microphone?
I think, let's see, Henry's hand went up, and who else? Hand out.
Okay.
And John.
Well, okay. Yeah, I'm a little bit out of sequence here. I don't go back very far, just 1948. I believe it was in 1968 that the railroad tracks were still on the Burke-Gilman. And behind Anderson Hall, which is forestry, was an old locomotive. And they figured they had to get that thing out while the tracks were still in. And they got it about a quarter mile down the pike, and it pooped out. It took them about a month to get it going again.
Interesting.
Thanks. I was wondering a couple of things. How did they find anybody qualified to teach when there were only a couple of hundred people around? That's one question. The other one is, those streetcars in the 1890s, how were they powered?
I don't know how they were powered. I'll look that up.
Electric, I think.
It had to be
Do
electric.
you have any comments on my first question? Where did they find anybody qualified to teach when there were only a couple of hundred people around?
Well, I think some of the people that came to teach were people that were interested in being teachers, or maybe had been trained to be teachers in other locations before they got here. But much of what was being done was being taught to children at the elementary level and high school level. There were very few of those that were teaching at the collegiate level until a little later. Yeah.
I'm curious about the number 7th ranking of the university. Does that apply to the entire school, undergraduate and graduate? And who provides that ranking?
Give it to Henry to answer.
I'm not entirely sure of just how that formal ranking is done. U.S. News and World Report had carried it out for years and years. I don't know if they've still done it. And of course, as you know, it's subject to great question.
And Yeah, pass it on to.
I actually had a question. If I remember correctly, I think Lincoln began the idea of the land-grant colleges.
Right.
So it was,
That's right.
must have been right around that time, the early 1860s,
Oh, right.
that the notion of doing that on a statewide basis existed. So that's possibly what gave birth to the original idea of the university.
Yeah, interesting.
Thanks for all of this talk about the places where we lived for many years. We were living in the part of of this place that really lingers in my memory. And there were just a couple of events that come back to me as I listen to you. One of them is that you could find the waters that were trickling down from north and west. They trickled down past everything that existed now and became a little village, a little stream, maybe a foot wide and maybe 3 inches deep. And it would go through the Ravenna Park, very lovely. And by the time we got there, there were people from Vietnam that were living in that area after the Vietnam War. And they would go down to that very stream and they planted and they picked vegetables. I mean, actually, can't remember.
Watercress.
Watercress on the edges of that stream and took it home and sold it. Anyway, it was a lovely place. Thank you for writing about it and talking about it.
I might comment that the person who wrote the book that I was just talking about, their bank was over a little stream like that. And you could go down into the basement, and they had an opening where you could still see some of that going underneath the bank. And this was on the corner of 45th and 15th. But I thought that was interesting. But there wasn't, if those little streams were coming down, they were being fed into Lake Union.
As a follow-up to Jerry's comment on where do they get the data on ranking, I take UW Today, which is free to everybody if you're interested. It's a nice thing that comes out once every weekday. But it brags 2 or 3 times a month, I swear, that the red school is ranked number such and such, and this school is ranked such and such worldwide. So they keep real close track on where they stand.
We were talking about how little there was in the way of academic achievement early on. My father-in-law came here to do his graduate work in the 1920s and served as a professor for over 40 years until 1970.
Okay, well, I apologize for the problems with the equipment, but hopefully we get a bit of a feel for how much had to change to get from the start of the territorial university to where it could begin to grow and develop into the marvelous university it is today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.